Hello there. You might be thinking, how can an Italian economist discovery in 1896 possibly affect my photography or anyone else's photography for that matter? During research, Vilfredo Pareto recognized that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. So what is a reasonable response? But not so fast. Out of, say, the hundreds of thousands of photographers who've already existed, how is it possible that you can only name 100, and of that 100 you really only rate a few of them? Therein lies the rub. The Perito curve is a law of existence that governs all creative production, in the same way that gravity is a permanent feature for us living on Earth. If you don't believe me, then Google it. Or more persuasively, look at things like how many Beatles songs were made and how many of them get played by music stations over and over again. How many bands exist and how many make it. A tiny number of football players like Ronaldo or Messi score most of the goals. And out of all the goal-scoring videos that one sees on YouTube, there's a tiny proportion that gets seen over and over again. This subject might provide an answer to that repetitive voice that pops into your head when you visit a photographic exhibition, saying like, how come my work isn't here? Surely my picture of my buddy jumping over a puddle is as good as Cartier-Bresson's. If human pursuits were governed by the bell curve, then life might be a lot fairer. It maps things like human height or weight or IQ. In this normal distribution, the majority of people are what we call average, say, height. So if we applied this to the photography world, then things might be considered to be more socially acceptable. But the reason that we become photographers is not so that we can learn to produce the average photograph. I'm going to look at why being an artist of any kind is a low-win choice, and why it's a career for the brave. I lay out in a very simplistic example how the Perito curve can play itself out within the photography world.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the truth.
Let's say that we have 100 photography school graduates and they all produce work for their final exhibition. They are all keen, ambitious, and maybe there's a few that have no relationships going on, no distractions, and perhaps they're receiving the right input at the right time. And for whatever reason, they're kind of in the zone and produce their best work. During the exhibition week, everyone is optimistic about their career prospects. A few newspaper critics arrive and articles get written highlighting 10 artists, and maybe 10 artworks get sold. Suddenly you have 20 graduates whose status has shifted slightly. The effect of this can be felt or seen in an internal and on an external level. Those 20 graduates internalize feelings of success, recognition, and self-worth, while many of those that don't gain any acknowledgement will perhaps start to allow feelings of inadequacy to grow. Remember, this is a very simplistic model and I'm presenting the extremes. On an external level, the 20 photographers' names might enter the consciousness of the greater art world. Continuing this dark fairy tale, the next year the local photography fair launches a Young Photographer of the Year competition. Those 20 graduates have acquired a taste for recognition, and therefore they have extra motivation to produce work that fits the requirements of the competition. On the final day of the photography fair, 5 winners are chosen, and a few of those recently gained recognition during the graduation exhibition. Articles are written, photographs are taken of the winners with their artwork. Writers start using phrases like visions of the future, unique gaze, and creating from the heart. In amongst the crowd that surrounds the winner's work are a few gallery curators, and it just so happens that one of the galleries is desperately trying to remain relevant. While walking around the exhibit, the gallerist is repeating the mantra, "Find new talent, find new talent," until she spots one of the recently graduated winner's photographs. Nikki Berman installed a neon tube over a photo of a neon tube. The flashing light catches the curator's eye, and she remembers seeing something similar at last year's Biennale. The next day, the gallery announces that they've discovered a rare talent and that they're going to expose her work at next year's Paris Photo. Voila, the rest is history. Nikki Berman is the new Cindy Sherman. There ends the fairy tale. Even though the story is oversimplified, it illustrates how one success often leads to another, and that, as with the gallery curator, many institutional choices are influenced by the ambitions and insecurities of a few individuals. Also, never underestimate the effect of herd mentality. So this is how the Pareto curve works. It's ruthlessly shifted through those initial 100 photography graduates to produce one superstar. If success was limited to this template, then it would be a very depressing picture. But it isn't for a number of reasons. If you are aware of how the Pareto distribution operates, then you can step back and strategize how to game the system. At every stage during the story, there are a million things that are affecting the system, and therefore determining which photographer's work will gain recognition. Being awake and astute means that you can disrupt the existing flow at any stage by responding to new dynamics. Tenaciousness is probably the most valuable trait, but combined with raw talent, it becomes almost impossible to ignore. Eventually, it will be rewarded. The art system operates in a similar way to the distribution of wealth. The famous 1% is roughly stable, but the people that occupy that space are constantly changing. In the photography or art world, the shifts are not quite as dynamic, but there's constant movement. New ways of seeing will always have appeal. The Perito principle is also worth considering when looking at your own overall photographic production. Chances are that you will find that a very small percentage of your images will have the most impact. Being able to gain some perspective about your work is always a good thing, but when you realize that the Pareto distribution is just a peculiarity of existence, it becomes easier to accept that your best work will probably fit on a memory stick with some room to spare. Apart from factors like luck and timing, there are very few moments in which we are in the flow and creating from a place that is beyond our logical selves. These rare moments are when our creativity gets closer to our potential. We are now going through a strange period where everyone who runs a race gets a prize. One might say that by instituting equity ideology, civilization has evolved to a stage in which we've achieved real democracy. By top-down control, we've managed to remove the pesky meritocracy, and in so doing, we've made a society more equitable. The counter-argument is that in our hurry to be nice to everyone and not to hurt anyone's feelings, we're doing away with excellence. Imagine what photography would be like today if we removed merit a long time ago, and people like Robert Frank and Cartier-Bresson had not risen to the top. Without merit, all aspects of society start to flatline, and one is just left with mediocrity. On an individual level, without excellence, there's very little for us to aspire to. And without aspiration, there cannot be motivation. On a broader cultural level, without a structure of meritocracy, the photography or art world will also flatline. Because who would bother to visit a gallery unless the experience made one's heart race? So the Perito curve isn't nice. But then again, who said that niceness is the greatest human virtue? When I was 10, I had aspirations to be a great football player. But by the age of 13, I realized that I just didn't have the right stuff. And it was useful for me to figure that out as quickly as possible so I could shift my energies into other pursuits. Okay, I think I'm going to leave Perito and his curve there. I hope that you found something interesting, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Is it over yet?
This is good. It really is.
What are they?
Well,
and find out what the future holds in store.
Is it over yet?